focus on that. And I thought, wow, there's like a whole message there, because we could talk about all the bad things the disciples did, and be holier than thou, and talk about how bad they were, and then remember how bad we are, and understand that the disciples were merely an example of who we are. And then Pastor Keith, it's funny for me to call him that, because I always, I know him as Keith. I know him as Keith the soldier, as Keith the wrestler, as Keith the brigader, and it's hard sometimes to think about. He's also a pastor. But Keith was in here, and one of the things that he said that I thought was really important was it's not about ability. Right? He wanted to stress the fact that when God calls on us, it's not necessarily because he's looking at a skill or an ability we have, but what he is looking for is availability. He's looking for people who are there and willing to help out. So as we did that, I started thinking about examples of people being called upon. And there's an image I'm going to put up, and I don't think anybody's going to have any question of what this image is. Most of us understand who and what we're looking at. So Barb, you can throw the first image up there. Who doesn't know this one, right? I didn't put the words with it, but what goes with that image? I want you, or we want you, right? This is Uncle Sam, right? From our history and heritage, this is kind of an important picture, especially those who are old enough to remember World War II, right? This is an important image. But when we look at the church, I had to play off on it a little bit. Now Holly can be embarrassed, because now she'll see why I had her stand against the wall. Because I said, you know what? Well, Holly needs people too. Because as we approach Vacation Bible School, we have some spots that need to be filled. So not only does Uncle Sam want you, Holly wants you. But if you think about it, it's not really Holly that's calling on you, right? Holly is merely helping run the ministry of Vacation Bible School. She's got a lot of people that are helping out. Know that there are different people who are involved in different ways. Most of them way more than I have been involved. My involvement will come later. But there are a lot of people. You see some of these decorations here. The kids and the adults and the crafty people, we would call them. I'm not one of those crafty people, right? But they're here. They're doing these decorations. They're putting things ready. You're getting things ready. People are bringing foods and drinks and other donations in. There's a lot of behind-the-scenes work going on. Trudy is struggling because incidentally, you need wood, right? If anybody's got lumber, talk to Trudy, because we got to rebuild a sign or get a sign ready to go. And there are all these things that are occurring, but there's still more, and Holly is standing there. So Holly needs you. And remember, it's not necessarily ability, it's availability. Are you here willing to work? Are you here and able to give of your time to serve this ministry? And remember, it's not just Holly or the church, it's God. But that gets us into one of those really difficult situations, right? How do we know when God is calling us, right? I want you to think about that in terms of where we are right now in this interim period. There is a pastor somewhere that God is calling to lead this church. Talked about it before. As a Baptist church, we understand that calling comes from God. All we can do is go along for the ride. But there's a pastor somewhere who has to have his or her, their ear open, right? They have to have their ear open to God pushing them in a direction and calling them into a new ministry. So how do we know when God is calling us? So I thought, let's look at a few examples in the Bible of people being called by God. And so there's a few readings. We're going to have some readings and look at some pictures. So here is one. It's Moses. It comes from Exodus chapter 3, verses 1 through 4. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. I have a picture of Moses. It's lots of pictures, but you can imagine you're walking up. Those of you who have watched big things burn, they burn. And so the idea of seeing this tree that might be out there, as I look at that one, I don't know what kind of trees have been on Mount Horeb at the time. I think of a manzanita bush out in the deserts of the Midwest or the West Coast, right? Manzanita bushes burn. You light a manzanita bush up, it goes. It just burns really fast. And that's kind of what I think. And, because Moses was caught off guard by the fact, well, this thing's not burning up. So Moses sees this burning bush. So here's one example of somebody being called by God. Not only was there a physical manifestation, the burning bush, but there was the vocal, right? Moses, right? I like to think that would be a really easy one. I think most of us do, right? If God were to physically appear and say, I need your help, you'd be like, oh, well, yeah, of course, certainly. There are other examples, though, where it's not as clear, right? So we're going to look at Samuel, 1 Samuel chapter 3, verses 1 through 10. The boy Samuel ministered before the Lord under Eli. In those days, the word of the Lord was rare. There were not many visions. One night, Eli, whose eyes were becoming so weak that he could barely see, was lying down in his usual place. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying down in the house of the Lord, where the ark of God was. Then the Lord called to Samuel. Samuel answered, Here I am. And he ran to Eli and said, Here I am, you called me. But Eli said, I did not call. Go back and lie down. So he went and lay down. Again the Lord called, Samuel. And Samuel got up and went to Eli and said, Here I am, you called me. My son, Eli said, I did not call. Go back and lie down. Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord. The word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. A third time the Lord called, Samuel. And Samuel got up and went to Eli and said, Here I am, you called me. Then Eli realized that the Lord was calling the boy. So Eli told Samuel, Go and lie down. And if he calls you, say, Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. Samuel went and lay down in his place. The Lord came and stood there, calling as at the other times, Samuel, Samuel. Then Samuel said, Speak, for your servant is listening. Come back to that. I don't have it in my notes, so I'm going to come back to that. There's a picture, again. I have a picture of Samuel, and I won't come back to it. I'll say it right now, because you look at this, I like this. I picked this picture because Samuel's he's got his arms held out, and, we like to think that he's thinking, yes, Lord, here I am. But when I look at that picture, I think, Eli, what are you doing? Will you stop? I'm trying to sleep, right? Can you imagine getting called over and over and over again? Now, parents, yes, as parents, we know we get called all the time, right? Daddy, daddy, mommy, mommy, daddy, right? But can you imagine getting called? No, I didn't call you. Go back to bed, wake up again. I didn't call you. I didn't call you. You'd be like, will you stop? I'm trying to sleep here. So Samuel's standing there. Here I am. I'm here. But we also had the disciples who were called. Now, the different disciples had different callings. They were called in different ways, which I think is important to what we're talking about today. I'm looking at Matthew 4, verses 18 to 22, where we're looking at Peter and Andrew and James and John, right? It says, as Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. Come, follow me, Jesus said, and I will send you out to fish for people. At once they left their nets and followed him. Going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James, the son of Zebedee, and his brother John. They were in a boat with their father Zebedee, preparing their nets. Jesus called them, and immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. I didn't find a picture of people casting nets, but I did find a picture of some people fishing and Jesus walking by. Hey, come with me. And one other example I want to look at is Zacchaeus from Luke chapter 19, verses 1 through 6. In Luke, we read, Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. So here we have a bunch of different examples, and I do have a picture of Zacchaeus up in a tree. Climbed up the tree so he could see Jesus. A bunch of different examples here of people who have been called by God. Some are easy, some are not as easy to see. Most of them are a little easier, but you have Moses, right, the burning bush. What's going on, right? Then you got Samuel. Not as easy to understand, right? Easy to confuse. He keeps hearing a voice, doesn't realize it's God. Keeps going to the wrong person, right? Fortunately, he kept going to Eli, and Eli was able to sort it out. Not me calling you, buddy. Someone else. And that someone is probably God. You need to listen and pay heed, right? The disciples, right, they were called. I think it's easy. Jesus walks up, says, hey, come with me, right? On the way to church today, Nicholas was talking about making friends. And he let me know he has 12 million friends. I said is a lot. I think it's more in the state of Wisconsin. But I said, it's good. And he says he has a way of making friends. And we were talking about, well, Dad, if you make a friend, you invite him over for coffee? I don't know if I meet somebody right now and invite them over for coffee. Maybe I talk with them a little bit. I don't know if I invite them to coffee or to go to a movie. There are all these things we talk about. Do you do this with the new friends? What do you think about it? You're out fishing, right? You're at work. Let's just put it that way. You're at work. Somebody comes by and says, follow me. How many of us throw the mouse down, turn the computer off, and walk out? I know that a lot of us would do that. But sometimes that's what we're called to do. So go back to Pastor Jim's message and the help wanted theme, right? The idea that Jesus and God have these things that have to happen. They have these things that they need the church to do. People to do it. And then back to Keith's message, right? Availability, not ability, right? And compare that to these situations that we just looked at, right? God called on people of different abilities in different ways. Moses, one of the first things Moses told God, I'm not a speaker. I'm not someone who's comfortable going in front of people and talking to them. He flat out told God, I don't know that I'm your guy. Right? What did God tell him? I need you to be there. I need you to do this. I'll give you the words. I'll tell you what to say. You'll know what to do it and when to do it. God was with him. He was looking for Moses to be there and respond. And what did Moses say? I'm here. Here I am. He didn't run away in fear. He didn't turn around and say, no, too scary. He didn't say, no, I'm too busy. I'm here. Right? Samuel was a little kid. He was working in the temple to help the leaders of the church. And God picked him. God picked him and said, Samuel, I need your help. Samuel didn't get it at first. He didn't understand it even. But when he was told this is what's happening, this is what's going on, he responded exactly as someone suggested, and he said, yep, your servant is listening. I have my ears open. I hear you. I hear what you're saying. Not only that, I'm listening. Okay? We always tell our kids, right, there's a difference between hearing and listening. Samuel was listening to what God had to tell him. The disciples, Jesus didn't go out and find, the leaders of the church. He didn't go out and find the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the people with extensive training, follow him. He went out and found fishermen and tax collectors. He found sinners. He found people who were maybe not the ones that we would look to normally. They weren't the people he would go, yep, that's the guy I'm following, right? He went and grabbed them because they were available and they were willing to listen and they were willing to follow him. They didn't let their own beliefs and their own egos and their own ideas get in the way. The disciples followed him. They threw down their nets and they went. That's got to be one of the toughest decisions I think any of us could make. And how many of us, like I said, if we heard God saying, I need you to go here, I need you to do this, how many of us would say, no, I'm comfortable where I'm at. I'm good. Thanks all the same. I'm good. Disciples didn't do that. Same with Zacchaeus. No, Zacchaeus was the same. He was a tax collector. We know he was a cheater. We know he was ripping people off. But he heard about this Jesus guy coming, and he said, I want to go see who this guy is. Not only that, I'm going to go and I'm going to run ahead and I'm going to climb a tree so I can make sure I see him. Just came by. He said, Zacchaeus, I need your help, buddy. I got to go to your house. Just met him. I said, I don't know how I'm inviting people I just met to my house, but Zacchaeus did. Zacchaeus invited Jesus in. Think about it, right? That there's a lot more there than it would seem on underlying. Yeah, sure, he invited Jesus in and they had some food and drink, but Zacchaeus invited Jesus in, which is what we do as Christians, as a church. We invite Jesus in. When Jesus calls on us, we need to be able to respond. Each of these individuals was called for a reason. Jesus had a reason for calling them. God had a reason for inviting Moses and Samuel into his ministry. He does the same for each of us. He does it in different ways. None of these people weren't all called in the exact same way. They were all called in different ways. They were all called for different reasons. They all had different abilities, usually not even necessarily ones that we would think are great for a ministry. But as Keith said, God didn't call them. Jesus didn't ask them to be involved based on their abilities. He called them based on their availability, which is why what Keith had said last week 2 weeks ago struck so hard with me, because I think about it and I was like, what is God calling me to do? What is God calling this church to do? And are we available? Are we there? So when you're out there listening, when you're out there hearing things about where maybe God is calling you, we don't all have Eli. I wish we did. I wish we all had our own personal Eli to say, oh, this is what's happening, because that would be awesome. Because as many of you, I'm not great at hearing God all the time, and I know we struggle with it, so it would be awesome if we had somebody to say, this is what it is. A lot of times we do. We just don't hear it. We don't want to hear it. We don't think about it. So as you're going through the rest of the day, the rest of the month, the rest of the year, whether it's just myself or others standing up here, or we get a new pastor, you have to have your ears open to what God is calling you to do. And then you have to be like so many others here and say, yeah, Lord, I'm here. How can I help you? When that starts to happen and we start to have that fire and we start to think about that, then we'll truly be reaching outside of the walls. We'll be able to go out and do those things that God is calling us to do, and then we'll be able to really thrive and serve the ministry that God is calling us to do. I'm not saying that there's going to be 150 people in the church. I don't know if that's what God has planned for us. But what I am saying is that individually we will be able to reach out and to do those things and to serve God's calling us to do if we're only willing to say, yes, Lord. Please join me in prayer as we close out this message. Heavenly Father, one of the most difficult things in the world is to say, I volunteer. I'm there for you. I'll help out. Sometimes we find it remarkably easy when our own interests are served, when it helps us in some way, when we think it benefits our needs or our desires. When it starts to simply be a sacrifice on our part and to be that, unknown, when we're called to step out and do things that we're not so sure about, it gets real difficult. Doing it based on what we think might be your voice giving us direction, then it gets really hard. And we know that all too often we fail to hear what you're asking and we fail to act. So I ask that you would be with each of us here today and help us, whether it's to serve as an Eli and to serve as that person helping to discern your voice, or to be the person who is listening and hearing, responding. Help us to be willing to say, here I am, Lord, I'm a servant and I'm listening. That we can better serve your church and your mission and do everything that we can to grow the glory of your message and your vision and your mission on earth. In your name we pray.